Oh, well, welcome everyone. I'm honored to be here and such a pleasure to do this and to meet and chat with you about things that I love best. So I'm really grateful that you're all here. And just a little bit about me. I am from the Central Valley in California. My house is 2 miles from the entrance to Sequoia National Park. And every time I go up to the sequoias, they're only 30 miles away, but it takes an hour and a half to get there because of the switchbacks. It takes my breath away. I am just blown away by these enormous trees and their beauty. And I feel the same way coming here to Oahu. It is such a beautiful place. I love the language. I love the vegetation. I love going over the mountains and seeing the mountains, the beaches. I mean, just takes my breath away. So thank you very much, Assets, for having me back this year and allowing me to be here. I'm just so grateful. So she mentioned that I've had several decades in literacy training, even a score or two. I just can't say the real number because, that'll give away exactly how old I am. And if you name an age or a grade level, I've probably taught it, including adults. And I'm an instructor for Slingerland training, so I do this all over the place and also online. And I am an instructor for the credentialing program that she mentioned in Tulare County, and also as a school board trustee for 12 years at our local school in Three Rivers, and that gave me a different perspective on teaching and being a parent and all of those things. So these are our goals tonight. We're going to talk about how reading and writing is really, truly rocket science. And there's 3 main modalities for the learning. We're going to talk about the science of reading and structured literacy programs, and then specifically the Slingerland approach, which they use here at Assets. When you start with a baby, speech and language comes naturally. Our brains are wired for language. You don't have to directly teach most kids how to talk. They just pick it up, and it starts in the womb, doesn't it? I mean, they come out hearing voices and tuning towards those. Handwriting, writing, and reading all do have to be directly, explicitly taught. None of those, our brains are not wired for those aspects of learning. So that's what we really try to do. And talk about rocket scientists, this is the reading rope, which I just love because it shows how all of these things, and you do have this handout in your packet there, all of these things interact and weave together in order to help students become proficient readers. Is this in your way? Can you see those? Okay. So I also like this because if you notice, some of the lines are longer than other lines. And that's because that's what develops first in a growing child. So you can see perception and a little memory and language and attention, all of those things start right away as soon as the baby's born and even before. And then it goes on and you see all the other things that need to be directly taught, tying together to help students become proficient readers. So in our first section here, we're going to talk about the modalities specifically and some differences that you might see and then areas of need that you might see. 3 sets of modalities of learning. So we've got the auditory, what you hear, we've got the visual, what you see, and we've got the kinesthetic, which includes both speech and also writing, the handwriting skills and all of that as part of the kinesthetic modalities. And you want to practice things so they'll become automatic in all of those things and develop automaticity. Now, typically developing learners have all of those things operating together and things go pretty well. There might be some easier ones for some, but they all kind of go together. And by the way, I do not read my slides to people. So I hope that works for you. And I'm sure that if you need a copy of them afterwards, we could figure something out. But I figure I'm not going to take your time. And I have a good friend who reads every word on every slide, and I love her. I learn something every time she speaks, and I can't stand it. So typically developing learners have those things working together in concert. They just kind of do. And everybody has preferred learning modalities. You're strong in some, you're a little weaker than the others, and that's just fine. You might have a couple that you're strong in, a couple that you're weaker, and it's just fine. I mean, I need to write things down if I'm going to remember them. And that might be due to having leveled up to a certain point where I absolutely can't remember things as easily, but I've always needed to do that, just write things down. So my kinesthetic is something that really helps me learn and hold on to things. Some students need to see something, and if they don't see pictures or the words, they're not going to absorb what is given auditorily through speech. And for some students, these pathways work together simultaneously, and for others, one pathway might be weaker or harder to use, and even though they're very bright, capable learners, it's not caused through a lack of effort or intelligence, and that may cause some challenges for them in learning, because there's something that's weaker that's just not jiving with the other ones. And they really reflect the differences in how our brain processes language. So in this slide, and you'll see this slide several times here, we've got the auditory modality where you hear a word. You've got the visual modality where you see or imagine the letters that will spell that word. And then the kinesthetic where you're writing the word and actually saying the word as well. That uses the kinesthetic modality too. So if there is an auditory weakness, how might that impact things in their spelling? Here are a few things you might see. Shorter auditory memory, so it's hard to hear and process what's coming in and remember it. You might not be able to hear the differences between words or what people are saying. You might not perceive them correctly from the beginning. And you might have a processing speed, which all impact your ability to follow oral directions. I had this one student who had a processing delay of 1 minute. And I found that if I said something to Rebecca and I walked away and I let her process and came back, I got high-level thinking out of her. She was very intelligent. If I kept talking, I made her look and feel stupid, because she then had to process what I was saying at that point. You know how hard it was for me to keep quiet for a minute? Real challenging. You also might see ways that students are compensating. So they might do a lot of self-talk. And of course, this is normal for all of us. I have to talk through the things I've got to remember and all of that. And they might just sub-vocalize, so they're saying it just underneath where you can hear. And they're trying to do that in order to hold on to whatever it is that you just asked them to do, or how to spell a word, or what they want to write. So how would it look if a visual weakness was going on? Here are things you might see in that situation. Short-term visual memory might be a real challenge, and long-term too. A lot of remembering how to spell is visual memory, and I have one of those visual memories where I can walk into a room or pick up a menu or look at anything and go, that word's spelled wrong. I hardly even read it. My brother had dyslexia. He could read very well, and he could not spell or write to save his life. He could think of 8 ways to solve a problem. I can think of 1.5 on a better day. So, who got the better gift? And I tell you, he made a lot more money than I ever did. But that's what things that you might see. And again, that processing delay or visual tracking going across and things like that. They might not perceive the letters correctly. They might not see the same letter. They might flip it around. They might transpose the order in a word. And so that impacts reading and spelling, of course. Here's ways they might compensate. They look around to see what's around them, to copy or to give a reference point so they can hold on to things using those tools. So, what would you see if the motor kinesthetic weakness was going on? Integration with all of it, especially the auditory channel, because speaking is part of kinesthetic modality. And so that just really can impact the speech and being able to put words together and remembering how to say the sentence correctly. It also really impacts handwriting. So that formation and automaticity in remembering the letter forms and getting them down on paper can be a real challenge. And inconsistent letter size relationships. If some are large, they throw in capitals. I don't know whether it's a B or a D, so I'll just put capitals in there. That's a compensation. I think a lot of engineers have issues with spelling because they all tend to write in all capitals. And spatial organization, like how are they going to really organize their paper and see how it all fits together? It doesn't come naturally to them. And then that speed issue again. So what might you see them doing to compensate? They might be pointing or tracking with their finger or tapping or bobbing their head or doing something on their legs or writing a letter on their leg that they're trying to remember or a word on their legs, something to help them build up that kinesthetic modality that's more challenging for them. So if you can identify the areas of need, that really helps educators pinpoint how to best support the students. And knowing the preferred modality and the ones that are weaker can help also determine the supports, the scaffolding, the accommodations, whatever they might need in order to be a successful learner. It is challenging to spell a word. And doing, like writing, hearing something and writing it out, and taking a spelling test or taking notes during a lecture is one of the most challenging things, because you have to hear the word correctly. You have to form it in your mind and attach all the right letters to the right sounds that you just heard. And then you have to get your hand to cooperate to get it down on paper, or your fingers to cooperate to type it on a keyboard. There's just so much going on in that process. And they may have more modalities of strength than they do of weakness. They might have more than one modality of weakness. So it just kind of depends on the student. We're all a little bit different. As I've been going through this, are you thinking, yeah, I'm strong in that, that's weaker for me? Or did I see any nods of heads as we just went through this? Yeah. I mean, and that's typical. We're average people, and that's the same thing with all of the children. Section 2, we're going to talk about these different things. What's kind of gone on in terms of this and really supporting students who have any sort of language learning difficulty. I love this quote by Anna Gillingham. If you have heard of OG as an instructional program, that's Anna Gillingham. And I'll talk a little bit more about her in just a second. But I love this. Children do not fail on purpose. They need less blame and more intelligent help. And this was back in the 20s. Where are we? So the National Reading Panel did a lot of study, and they finished it in 1997, and then they published it in the year 2000. And it said, let's really look at what happens for proficient readers. What systems do they need to have intact? And they came up with 5 pillars, if you will, of how to really teach reading. And there was more going on before that, but these are the 5 main ones that they really zeroed in on. And this impacted teacher training for a few years. So phonological awareness, being aware of sounds and being able to manipulate sounds, count syllables, things like that. Phonics, where you're actually attaching letters to sounds and knowing that relationship and being able to use those. Fluency is that automaticity with being able to read or speak or spell or write. And then vocabulary, understanding what words mean and being able to use them. Finally, leading to comprehension. And the basis for all of these things is oral language. It starts right at birth or even before, and that is the basis for all literacy skills, is oral language. And so one of the things we'll talk about in just a minute is how we do oral language development every single day. It is really challenging to write a complete sentence if you cannot speak a complete sentence. So many traditional type programs, I mean, they kind of paid attention to those findings, and then it slid the other way, as things do in education. That pendulum goes back and forth. And often they kind of expect kids to just pick it up. They'll grow out of it. They'll mature into this. They can memorize or guess a word from context. They might teach everything separately. Here's our spelling time. It's not a part of our writing time, and it's certainly not part of our reading time. Or having weekly spelling lists that they just have to memorize. So for struggling students, that is frustration right at its core. So, in the last several years, the science of reading took a look at all of these various studies on how to best teach literacy skill. And it's based on all kinds of studies that they did. And many states are now requiring their programs to be based on the science of reading. Hawaii passed that law in 2024. And they were one, not the first ones, but they're certainly right in there. They did it before California. What can I say? What is structured literacy then? That is taking all of that science about teaching reading and saying, how is this going to work? The how and the what are you going to teach? And so skills are going to be taught in a very logical, sequential, cumulative manner, and there's specific ways and specific skills that are going to be covered. And unfortunately, there are still many teachers out there who did not get this information when they got their credentialing. I was so fortunate because I lived in San Diego at the time, and my university was connected to a program in one of our towns around San Diego that was using Slingerland. I got this structured literacy program as a grad student, and it has totally shaped how I've taught for all of those decades, and maybe a score or two. IDA, the International Dyslexia Association, you have this in your handout as well, has taken a look at what's really in a structured literacy program. And we'll go through the how it should be taught and the what it should cover as we go on. This is really important to be asking schools if your children are not here at Assets. Are you doing this? Are you using a structured literacy program? Are you working on all of these things? And are you doing it explicitly in a multi-sensory type fashion? These are some of the programs that have IDA approval and are certified through IDA. Slingerland, the Slingerland approach is certified through IDA, and also IMSLC, which is the International Multisensory Language Education, and I never remember what the C is. Okay, have to look that one up. I should have done that. So these are structured literacy programs, and then there's lots of different names to them. Some of them are kind of a box scripted program. Wilson is one of those. And it's a great little box. You just have to know how to use it. And if you only have that box and the 2 days of training that come with it, you know, what do you get? What do you do for a student who doesn't respond immediately to the information in that little box? So that's something I love about what I was fortunate to get, and what the teachers here at Asset have, is that understanding and foundation for using any program. So the hows, this is the blue side. This is the how things are going to be taught. It's direct and systematic. It's very explicit, sequential, cumulative, highly interactive, and multimodal. So it's using all of those modalities at once. Data-driven, you give prompt feedback right away, and scaffolded and sufficient practice to build up that automaticity. Any good teaching program should do all of that in how they are teaching, no matter what they are teaching. And all of those are built into the Slingerland approach. So we are very systematic, simultaneous, multisensory. It's synthetic and analytic, so the big picture and the small picture. Cumulative and sequential. It's direct, it's diagnostic, and this is really crucial, we put skills to functional use immediately. We're not studying handwriting and then not using it right away. And I'll show you that as I look through the lesson plan too. And so then Seth, our executive director, said, I can take apart that how chart and put it on all these things and say, here's how that IDI graphic comes to life in terms of how we teach when we're using the Slingerland approach. We teach through all three modalities at the same time. It's integrated. Your kids are hearing, feeling, saying, speaking, touching. I mean, they're doing all of that at the same time. Many programs kind of just separate them out. So they say, okay, we're going to have a modality checklist, and our auditory kids will put here, and our visual kids will do this with it. I mean, who's got the time? And you can teach them all together at the same time and be very effective. So the Slingerland approach really rewires the brain. It helps strengthen the weaker modalities using the stronger modalities, and they all become stronger as they go. And these are some major principles about the multisensory approach that the Slingerland approach uses. It's simultaneously done. It always starts with a single unit and then gets more and more complex. It's very success-oriented. I remember Mrs. Slingerland, she was about this tall. And when I was first doing the trainings, I'd go up to Seattle to meetings, and somebody said something about a student failing. What do you do when a student fails? And she said, let a student fail? You would never let a student fail. You know, okay. So that's been my basis for how I teach. I'm not going to let the students fail. I'm going to structure so that they are successful. Teach us through the intellect. These are bright students. And so I'm telling them the whys constantly. And every single day we're talking about, why are we adding that suffix? Where do suffixes go? What do they do? Why would you choose CK at the end of this word? Because it's at the end of the word right after one short vowel. I mean, there's all kinds of predictable generalizations and patterns to our language for reading, writing, and spelling that I'm teaching them directly. And then everything is brought to functional use. It's not just memorized for another day. I've had teachers say to me in the class, nobody ever taught me this. I said, well, you got it. It was on page 188 at the bottom of some workbook that you had when you were in second grade. You know, you were never taught it, and you certainly didn't ever remember it and really put it to functional use. So now we'll talk about the what. Here's more of the rocket scientist stuff. And this is basically the content. That's that what part kind of broken down into easier vocabulary words of everything that we're trying to teach. And this is the Slingerland lesson plan format. So it has three main four. We always start with oral language development, and you have this one in your handout too. It says a little bit more on it than this basic one up here does. Oral language is the key to everything, so that's where we start with a question of the day. Then we go to learning to write. We can introduce new letters, and at this point with the kids who are coming to summer school, we've done just about every letter in cursive. I like cursive because it's all connected. You never have to pick up your pencil. It helps with any reversals, and all I need to do is get them automatic with those formations, and then it's much easier than printing. And then we go down the auditory side where they start from the auditory input. They hear things, and that leads to encoding, putting things into the code. This is speech to text. Spelling, where we're working with all of those different things, and dictation and being able to write phrases and paragraphs and all of those things. And the goal is always independent writing. Then we go over to the visual side, and that's where it's a visual input first. This is now looking at the cards, looking at the letters, so this is text to speech, going the opposite direction. And we just do some warm up for your reading brain. We go into decoding where they're actually figuring out and reading individual words. We do a preparation for reading that takes phrases from a passage and prepares them to read the passage ahead of time. So they're familiar, they understand what those are, and then we do structured reading, and the goal over here is always independent reading. And this just says kind of what I just said. Here's where we go with it. Everything that we're writing up here is going to be used down here. There's nothing extra. It's not a workbook. I look down here, I backward plan, and I plan what they're going to write here. And then I say, what letters do I need? What connections do I need to review? Because in cursive, there's 4 letters that end at that middle line, like the O and the V and the W and the B. And so those connections to the next letter are a little tricky. So I'll teach those directly and then review them if they're going to write words using that. And this is now your IDA graphic torn apart. The purple on your IDA graphic and saying, here's where it all fits in here, into that Slingerland lesson plan. So it's just so impressive to me how brilliant Mrs. Slingerland was. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about how this all started. But that's all included within a Slingerland lesson. We're going to get to it. Section 3, what are the origins of the Slingerland approach, and how is that, going to work so well for all these students? So the O in OG stands for Dr. Samuel Orton, who is a neurologist, and he is the one who's called sometimes the father of dyslexia, even though the term was said about 10 years before, used in Germany about 10 years before Dr. Orton. And he really separated the idea of dyslexia from anyone who is mentally deficient or lazy. These kids are not lazy. Now, my brother, who could read, got told, you're not trying hard enough. You need to try harder, because he could read. So that was proof that he was intelligent, and it was his fault that he couldn't spell and write. Here's Anna Gillingham again, the G in Orton Gillingham. She was a school psychologist, and she teamed up with Dr. Orton and a couple other people I'll mention, and they did the Orton Gillingham method. This was originally one-on-one for remediation of older students. She worked with Bessie Stillman, who is the teacher part of this, and a friend of mine has just started the Stillman Academy in San Francisco. So I'm so delighted that somebody's using Bessie Stillman. She was the teacher, for crying out loud. I mean, you know, she had a lot to say at how this whole thing was put together. And so she really contributed to all of this too. And then we have Beth Slingerland, who was over here in Hawaii for 18 years. And she was a teacher. She was the remedial reading teacher. She was a school head. She was, had a lot of jobs during that 18 years. And she noticed that there were a lot of kids who weren't learning to read accurately. So everybody was looking for, what do we do with these kids? And she found Orton and Gillingham and Stillman's work. And so she went to Glacier National Park during the summer. They said, well, you're going to have to come here, and we're going to Glacier. We're not, coming there yet. Well, so she did that for 2 summers and worked with them and learned what they were doing. And then they did come over here finally because, they had to come to Hawaii, right? And so one of her things that she said very clearly, she always believed in the power of clear, structured, focused teaching. So she said, don't assume the child knows, teach. Love it. And so she said, this is great what you're doing. You're doing it with one-on-one with older students. We need to be able to do it with younger students and in a classroom, because I got to hit more kids than just one at a time. And so she developed the Slingerland approach, and she used it in Renton, Washington for a number of years. And she also started to train teachers in her approach. And then she continued on and working with kids and training teachers, and she just was amazing. And finally, structured literacy and the science of reading caught up to what Orton, Gillingham, Stillman, and Slingerland did way back then. It's about time. She was just a genius, ahead of her time. So that's what she did then. The one-on-one, she adapted it for classroom. For younger students, she developed Slingerland screening tests, which really look at the interplays of those modalities and how that impacts tasks you might have in a classroom, like copying from the board, copying from the book, comparing things that are right on the page, hearing something and being able to find it, or hearing something and being able to write it. And so it really goes through the modalities, plus how are they really interacting in classroom tasks for that particular students. Another wonderful one of her lines was, always teach through the intellect. These are smart students. Tell them the whys and help them internalize it so they can use those strategies anytime, anywhere for the rest of their lives. Some of the benefits, the kids really learn how to learn. Put me out of a job. That's what I like to say. And I give the examples to my teachers. I was doing this with a group of 4th and 5th graders, especially the structured reading part, where we're looking at phrases. We're not just reading the sentence entirely yet. There's a lot of meaning in words. There's more meaning in phrases. And then you get to sentence and paragraphs and the whole passage. So I would break it down into phrases every day, and we'd be reading this. And we did this for several months. And one day I put the passage down on the table. They picked up their pencil and they started slashing the phrases. They didn't need me to tell them where the phrases were anymore. They could read them and see them and understand that's a where phrase, that's a what phrase, that tells you how many, that tells you when. I mean, they just put me out of a job. That's all I ask. And so there's our lesson plan again. And I don't know, am I terribly ahead of time? Not too bad, because I do tend to start talking fast. I'm so grateful that I got this training as a grad student, because it totally has shaped everything that I've done since. And when we were in Seattle for those meetings that Mrs. Slingerland was at, every single adult in the room was writing down every single word she said. I mean, she just was so powerful. She was small, but she was mighty. And there's our reading rope again, just to say there's so many things that go into reading. And we've talked about a lot of those things over there that just really kids need in order to become efficient readers. There's also a writing rope, which is interesting to look up too. We didn't include that tonight, but there is a writing rope too that just really looks at what do you have to do in order to become a good writer. So in summary, here's what I've tried to do. hoping that you're understanding the complexity of reading tasks and that there's that interplay between the learning modalities that for many kids just happens naturally and some kids it doesn't. And understanding the difference between different traditional programs and then structured literacy programs, and then specifically becoming a little bit of developing a little familiarity with the Slingerland approach. And I did talk fast. And that's the end. And I think we have time then to mingle and ask questions, and I'll be available, as will Tiana and other people from Assets. And I saw Santiago just walked in, who's another Slingerland trained person here. So yeah, thank you. My pleasure.